This is Liberty Mountain Radio, the voice of the coming apocalypse, broadcasting to you today from an undisclosed location in the not-too-distant future. The staff and management of this station is pleased to present for the first time ever the audiobook No Man's Land, written by Nathan Wolfe, copyright 2021, all rights reserved, narrated by Dennis Randall. Chapter 4. The dining area is located just off a large commercial kitchen at the far end of the great room. A supersized picnic table, lined with benches, provided more than enough seating capacity for the 37 females who made the colony their home. The table itself was a stunning thing of beauty. Over the years, the dozens of layers of polyurethane on the oak planking had been sanded to a mirror-smooth finish. I took a good hard look around as we descended the stairs. Designed to appear humble, at least from a distance, the cabin functioned as a state-of-the-art survival factory, with enough solar capacity on the roof to meet the needs of several large households. All of the lighting in the cabin utilized LED bulbs. The thousands of icicle lights deployed around the great room, why, they drew less power than 2 or 3 75-watt bulbs. The air temperature in the hall hovered at a pleasant 75 degrees. Most of the sisters of the colony were gathered in animated conversation around the expansive dining table. Sheila said it served as a conference center for group meetings. All the ladies were topless. Many were bottomless. Never before had I seen so much exposed female flesh in one place at one time. In a daze, I tried to process a torrent of new information. I was kind of prepared for the sight before me, thanks to Sheila's sudden introduction to public nudity. However, nothing Darlene said prepared me for the strange reality of actually being here. One of the women spotted us and shouted out a greeting to Sheila before we descended even a third of the way down the staircase. A naked Darlene awaited me with a hug by the time we reached the bottom. My lady love whispered in my ear as we embraced. "Dennis, give me a long, wet, sloppy kiss and play with my ass. I'll explain it all later." I learned long ago that obedience was the best course of action when Darlene gave a command like that. We locked lips and traded spit in one of the most passionate kisses we'd shared in a long time. As I held her, I lovingly caressed her bare bottom. Darlene let out a low moan. My hands cupped each cheek, and I jiggled them so much she burst out laughing, which ended in a loud yelp when I playfully smacked her ass. "What was that for?" she whispered. "Payback for your excessively detailed accounts. You tend to overshare." Darlene giggled, gave me a quick kiss, and took my hand, pulled me toward the serving line. "You got to get some supper before it's all gone. It's venison stew, and it's absolutely delicious." Flavored with an assortment of tasty vegetables which I couldn't identify, the stew was thick, hearty, and spicy. She was right. The taste was out of this world delicious. After allowing me a few minutes to eat, Darlene started to introduce me to each of the sisters. My lady love possessed a natural ability to remember names. I, on the other hand, had already forgotten the first by the time I had been introduced to the third sister. As I met each member of the colony, I shook hands, made and kept eye contact to avoid staring at their naked bodies, and repeated their names in a desperate effort to drill each pronoun into my memory. Most of the women responded warmly to our introduction. Several were somewhat reserved, and a few kind of hostile. Some of the sisters clearly had man issues, most likely the results of some abusive male in their history. I can't say I could much blame them. I could understand how my presence might be disquieting, to say the least. If I had just joined 15 years ago, a remote all-woman community put the world of men behind me, how would I feel to have one in my midst today? An attractive sandy blonde named Alice was the next to the last lady I was introduced to. She was well endowed, with a dark golden tan like the rest. I guessed her age to be about 50. Stretch marks on her somewhat saggy breasts and stomach suggested she had given birth at least once in her life. She was beautiful and seemed genuinely happy to meet me. She gave me a radiant smile and held onto my hand far longer than is customary. Alice turned to the young girl sitting next to her. "This is my daughter, Dennis. Her name is Starshine. She's been living in the colony since she was 3 years old. You're the first man she's ever met. She just celebrated her 18th birthday 2 months ago." I bowed and shook Star's hand and wished her a belated birthday, while doing my best to make and keep eye contact. Alice's daughter was drop-dead gorgeous, and her small perky breasts and slim elfin figure, and athletic, oh my word, all adorned and wrapped in a beautiful amber tan. She had bright blue eyes and wore her waist-length blonde hair in a braid, which made her look like a young Scandinavian fashion model. She was, in a word, stunning. I had a hunch I wouldn't earn points from her mother if I started drooling over a new daughter, so I did my best to keep my cool, even as I felt a stirring in my shorts. Oh, thank the Lord I was still fully dressed. Her mother must have been a mind reader. Alice took my hand and pulled me close. "Dennis, why are you still dressed? Why don't you strip down like the rest of us and make yourself comfortable?" I noted her question elicited a few murmurs of agreement, including a nod from Sheila, and an enthusiastic "I'll second that motion" from Arlene. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signal by saying "aye," Sheila announced in the voice of a true parliamentarian. A moment later, a loud chorus of ayes filled the hall. Sheila then called for the no vote. Crickets responded. I half-heartedly raised my hand and quietly said, "No." My vote was as much a joke as an opinion. Sheila smiled. Hearing minimal opposition, I declare the ayes have it. Motion carries. After a long pause, Sheila turned to me and said, "Okay, Dennis, you heard the vote. Now it's your turn." Chapter 5. Stripping would be awkward. Getting naked in front of a group of equally nude women was the last thing I wanted to do, especially with the stirrings of arousal. I decided that I had no choice but to comply. I would eventually Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Stripping would be awkward. Getting naked in front of a group of equally nude women was the last thing I wanted to do, especially with a sense of arousal stirring down below. I would eventually have to join the clothing-optional norm of the colony. I had no choice but to comply. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and unbuttoned my shirt and laid it on the table before removing my shoes, then my socks. I placed them each next to my shirt. I undressed as slowly as possible, trying to drag things out for as long as I could. I hoped my junk would settle down. I undid my belt, unzipped my jeans, let them slide down to my ankles, stepped out of my pants. I tossed them to the air with a flip of my foot, caught them with my free hand, folded the jeans, and laid them on the table. I remembered how my mother always told me to wear clean underwear in the unlikely event I had to go to the hospital. I prayed that there were no visible racing stripes marking me as I stood there in my whitey-tighties. A small but noticeable bulge was making a presence known in my shorts. I felt myself blushing. I noticed Alice and her daughter staring at me with interest. All the colony's sisters seemed to be paying pretty close attention to developments, in fact. The attention on my private parts by so many women produced a chilling effect on me. A wave of apprehension spread across my body. Being naked was the ultimate in performance anxiety, and I knew my junk was about as average as you could get. If the girls were hoping for a well-endowed porn star, I wasn't going to measure up. I removed my T-shirt next, folded it, and placed it on top of my jeans. I stood dressed only in my underwear for a few moments as I worked up the nerve for the final act. I debated with myself. I didn't have much choice. I would either check it out or drop my drawers. There was no in-between. Well, I'll give them a show if that's what they wanted, and apparently they wanted one. I slowly lowered my shorts and exposed a patch of light gray and brown hair. I paused and turned away from the table and slid my shorts to a kind of a half-mast position. My rear end partly exposed, I slowly lowered them to my knees, paused, and let them drop to my ankles. Gravity did the rest of the work. Turning around, I faced the women. My arms were spread wide. I did an exaggerated bow from the waist up. Alice's daughter giggled, and a smattering of happy, amused laughter emerged from the sisters. Thank God. My fear-installing tactics worked. I had shrunk to the point that I was not particularly noticeable, kind of hiding in the weeds, as it were. Well done, nicely played, Sheila said with a smile. She winked and gave me a thumbs up. I think this would be a good time for Dennis to introduce himself to this group. Dennis, why don't you take a few minutes and tell us about yourself? Thank you, Alice. That's an excellent suggestion. You have the floor, Sheila said. Chapter 6. The sisters' leader was testing me. Earlier, she had wanted to know if nudity by the colony's women would bother me. Now she was testing the sisters to find out whether my nudity would bother them. Quite clever, actually. I had done my share of public speaking over the years, but it was different this time. There is a certain something about standing stark naked in front of an audience that compels honesty. I decided to give a very brief, unvarnished account of my life thus far. I stood in thoughtful contemplation, my head bowed for a minute or so. Two things were working for me during this interlude. The first was the old showman's trick. Keep the audience in suspense by never quite starting on time. The second was a political trick. Use any extended silence to focus your mind and gather your wits. Show the audience you're thoughtful, caring, or as my dad used to say, sincerity is everything. If you can fake that, boy, you got it made. While I spoke, I was going to read the body language of my audience to gauge my reception. Hello, I said. My name is Dennis Nathan Richards. I was born in New Haven, Connecticut. I'm a retired Vietnam veteran. I fingered the string of Vietnam service beads hanging around my neck. I'm a 100% unemployable. I have a 100% unemployable disability thanks to exposure to Agent Orange while in Saigon. I spent 4 years in the United States Air Force, mostly in Japan and Vietnam. What did you do after you got out of the service? Alice asked. I joined a local branch of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War and spent the next 3 years marching to end that foolish conflict. When it ended, I joined the Army. Wow, one of my sisters said. Why? Another one asked. I thought you were against the war. Sheila looked at me with a concerned shadow of a smile as her puzzled eyes searched my face for something she couldn't quite see. I am against war, I said, but I'm not opposed to fighting to defend my country or speaking out when it screws up. It's a citizen's duty to do both. I like to think of myself as a well-armed, patriotic pacifist. Anyways, I was broke, and one day I happened across a bunch of Army reservists doing weekend duty at the mall. They were recruiting and desperate to make quota. I was bored and desperate for conversation. We got to talking. The captain told me that if I joined that weekend, I could enlist as a Sergeant E5. I would draw pay at that rank for the next 2 weeks of active duty at Fort Drum, and every weekend thereafter that I was on base. Because I was prior service, I didn't need to go through Army basic training. It sounded like a pretty good deal to me. I needed the coin. I enlisted. I searched the faces of the sisters while I spoke and tried to assess my ability to engage each woman at a deeper and more positive level. I was, in essence, trying to make small talk or seduce a room full of naked lesbians. Talk about your lost cause. You can stop me at any time, I said. If you want to ask me a question, that'd be great. I'd rather this be a dialogue and not a monologue. I said that in an effort to break the ice. The invitation to elicit questions resulted in one brown-haired woman tentatively raising her hand. I asked her to remind me of her name, and she said, My name is Amelia, and I have a question for you. You said you get a monthly disability check for the VA. What kind of disability do you have, my dear? You seem to be in pretty good shape. Good question, Amelia. My disability is mostly invisible. It's type 2 diabetes. It's the result of too much exposure to Agent Orange while in Vietnam. More specifically, severe neuropathy in my right hand and my feet. That's one of the side effects of diabetes. What are the other effects of your neuropathy? Amelia asked in a follow-up question. Neuropathy is its nerve damage as a result of too much sugar in my blood. Or in my case, the result is numbness and tingling in my hands and feet. The other effects are rather embarrassing, I said as I paused. I'm not sure how much detail I wanted to go into. Oh, don't stop there. Please explain. Tell us everything, Amelia asked as she pressed me for more information. Well, sometimes it's difficult to get it up and keep it up, I reluctantly volunteered to the group. Amelia and several of her sisters nodded. I noticed Sheila and Alice are paying very close attention to the conversation. The result, I said, is well, put it this way, I'm a charter member of the LDS. And for lack of better words, I got a limp dick. That's when the nerves in my prick stop responding to my brain. They do what they want to do. My brain thinks what they want to think, and they don't necessarily have anything in common. At least I had their attention. Sex is always an interesting conversation. Can you still get an orgasm? Alice asked with a look of concern on her face. Yes, even when flaccid and floppy, a guy can still ejaculate. It just takes a little more effort, and it's not nearly as much fun, I explained. Our hardware may be broken and rusty, but it still leaks. I don't understand. Darlene says you're a fantastic lover. How can you be if you don't get hard? Alice asked. I heard several sisters say I was wondering the same thing myself. My goal or mission as a lover, I responded, is to provide the necessary and emotional physical stimulation required for my partner to achieve an orgasm. I do that orally. This is all feeling rather clinical. Standing stark naked in front of a table full of attractive and nude women while talking about orgasms and oral sex were having unintended consequences. I could feel myself begin to wake up and stiffen. There was no way to hide my growing arousal. I thought you said you couldn't get hard, but apparently something's happening down there, one of the women observed. Yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes no. The little guy has kind of like a mind of his own. I can never depend on him to respond as I want. It's all rather embarrassing and frustrating. I explained as I shared far more information than I wanted to. Looking at several sisters' body language, I saw signs of what looked like sexual responses from about half of them. Many leaned forward a bit more than usual, necks and chests rose, tinted with excitement, faces relaxed, smiling, or friendly neutral. Body postures showed a focused interest. At some primal level, pheromones floated like mist in the air, and our bodies were responding. I looked down at my grandfatherly, gradually stiffing member and covered myself with my hand. Sorry about that, ladies, but it's all this talk about sex and stuff seems to be having an effect on my hardware, as I'm sure everyone has noticed. My junk never seems to respond as I wish. As I said, it's all rather awkward. I could feel the heat of a blush burn across my body. Darlene, thank God, came to my rescue. She walked up to me and gave me a big hug and a lingering kiss, then turned to face her companions while holding my free hand. I think Dennis is thinking about the love-making session we'll have when we go to bed, she said with a foxy grin. She started to rub my backside, and while she stood next to me, much to her sister's amusement, the sensation of her warm hands massaging my bare butt did nothing to diminish my arousal. Under her playful touch, I continued to flourish until about 3/4 firm, a little less than 4 inches. Looking over my audience of colony members, I noticed that all were paying close attention to the interplay between Darlene and me. I was at a loss for words and didn't know how or if or what I should continue or try to beat a hasty retreat. Don't be embarrassed about getting excited, Dennis. It's a natural event, Sheila said. We all get sexually aroused from time to time. It's just that when you get aroused, it's slightly more noticeable and harder to hide than ours. Her statement got a chorus of chuckles and laughter from the sisters, and did much to ease the tension that had been building in the room. I'll put it to a vote if it makes you feel better, Dennis. By a show of hands, sisters, how many of you would like Dennis to proceed with a self-introduction? Sheila asked the crowd and raised her hand as her vote yes. Unanimous show of hands joined with Sheila. The sisters wanted the show to go on. The vote left me both relieved and annoyed at the same time. I was glad I hadn't offended them or bored them to death, but I was still several zip codes away from my comfort zone. Exhibitionism, on certainly such a grand scale, has never been my thing. I turned to Darlene, who was still playing on my bare butt, and said, "Honey, maybe now is not the best time for foreplay. Can we continue this a little bit later?" Darlene was as much a ham as I was. She got the hint and with exaggerated stage pout said, "You're such a little tight ass. You need to learn to relax and have fun." She jiggled my ass cheeks with both hands, and the jiggle made my package dance in the air. My mind went blank as I started to speak. I had forgotten what I was going to say. I was having a senior moment because the first words of my mind weren't appropriate for the time. "Okay, anybody have any questions while I try to get back on track?" I asked the one around me while I stalled. Alice and several of her sisters raised their hands. I figured it would be an easy question, so I called on Alice. "Since you're the only man living in a community of lesbians, Dennis, how do you feel about women who love women?" Alice asked as several of her companions nodded their approval of her question. I began my answer by explaining how Darlene and I were on the brink of being homeless when she suggested that we go to stay with her group of college friends who lived off the grid. Not that it made any difference, but she never bothered to mention that our new home would be an all-woman survival community. This is all unexplored territory for me, and I'm winging it the best I can. Bear with me. I believe everyone has the right to choose and love anyone of his or her choice. I doubt that we have much control when it comes to selecting our sexual identity. We are who we are. I don't remember getting a vote in the matter, and I don't remember deciding to be heterosexual. I just am who I am. The real question, I looked about the room, tried to connect my eyes with each woman there. The real question, my friends, is how do you feel about having a man living amongst you in this beautiful colony? Because as we all know, men can be real dicks, no pun intended, I said to an outburst of laughter. I continued. I noticed several folks didn't seem too happy with my presence when I spoke to you earlier. I suspect that personal experience with abusive males is likely to be the source of this negative attitude. Let me tell you, I can sympathize and I can feel your pain. I know a thing or two about abusive men. A male babysitter raped me when I was 12 years old. The sisters responded with a collective gasp. Alice looked shocked. Her daughter stared at me with wide eyes and an open mouth. Her hand shot in the air with an inquiry. "How did it happen? How did it make you feel? Was it traumatic?" Starstein asked a series of rapid-fire questions like an investigative reporter. "Well, without going into the gory details, it happened after I got severely sunburned," I told her. "My babysitter walked in as I got out of the shower. I was naked. He saw the sunburn and offered to give me a massage after he took his shower." A naked pedophile giving a nude, curious boy a massage? What could possibly go wrong? The rest is, as they say, history. The silence remained, and I continued. As to how it made me feel, I felt frustrated, I felt used, I felt humiliated, I felt embarrassed. I don't know how I felt. I was there exclusively for his pleasure, and as far as he was concerned, I wasn't even there as a person. I resented it, I think, and I vowed I would never treat a fellow human being the way he treated me. I didn't hate men when it was over, but I didn't really trust them either. I disliked the way too many of my gender treat other people, especially females, I explained. "Well, how do you feel about gay men?" one of the sisters asked without raising her hand. As I said before, I believe everyone has a right to love anyone of his or her affection. I think most of us occupy some point on the sexual spectrum. Very few of us are born 100% straight, or for that matter, 100% gay. Almost all of us are born at one side or the other of the rainbow of possibilities. What shade you are is who you are. Does that answer your question? I asked. Nodding heads told me that I had. What happens when you get an erection at a nude beach? Another sister asked with a laugh. I joined her laughter. I said, I either sit down, or I wait for it to pass, Oh, boy, I go behind a bush and I kind of take care of business, if you know what I mean. What would you do if you ended up staying with us? Sheila looked at me, a hard look of inquiry. Sheila was everything and anything you could want in a leader. She was thoughtful and measured in her approach to unexpected problems. I was an unexpected problem. I knew her questions weren't accidental in the least. They were all a test to determine whether I stayed or went away. My problem was I had no way of knowing what the right answers might be. My only option was to roll the dice, tell the truth, pray for the best. You and your sisters have built something that's really quite amazing and unique. It's precious, Sheila. The protection and continued safety of this community is top priority. I put my hands on my hips and looked about the great room. It's magnificent. I can understand why some might view me as a man to be a possible threat to this family. But I am who I am. There's nothing I can do to change that, I said. We're now talking about the elephant in the room, and the hall had become silent as each woman considered my words. I raised my right hand and faced Sheila. I vow to do everything in my power to help this colony continue to succeed under your leadership, I said while making eye contact with the group's leader. The world outside this valley. I looked at the walls of the tavern, the cabin, and looked beyond. The world outside this valley is changing into something very ugly and very dangerous. We live in troubled times, and I think having a man about you might be useful. I would like to be that guy. I'll place the safety of you and your sisters ahead of my own if you will allow it. I lowered myself to one knee before Sheila, crossed my arms over my chest, and bowed my head when I finished speaking. I held my position and waited for Sheila to speak. It may have been a bit melodramatic, but it seemed like the right thing to do. I had seen it done once in a movie. The silence seemed to stretch out forever, but I didn't move. I did a long count in my head to track the time. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Sheila broke the silence when I got to 53 Mississippi. That's a compelling offer, Dennis, and I appreciate your apparent sincerity. It's very moving, truth be told. However, I don't know you well enough to trust you with the lives of our family. I can't give you trust that you haven't yet earned. I will allow you to remain amongst us as my guest until I make a final determination as to your status here. Sheila paused, stood up, approached me, and put her hand on my shoulder. We will revisit this question in 2 weeks. You will not attempt to leave our company in the meantime. Sheila pressed her hand on my shoulder as she continued. Do you understand? Ouch, that was painful. She was not making an optional suggestion, just stone-cold command, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if I disobeyed. Yes, Sheila, thank you. I couldn't ask for more. You have my word of honor, I replied, and rubbed my shoulder as I resumed a standing position. At least my status had been clarified. I was the guest prisoner of the group's leader. A serious discussion didn't arouse me as much as sexy questions. My little guy got bored and decided it was time for a nap, and I took the opportunity to wrap up my brief introduction as quickly as possible. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you, and I'm thankful for your generous hospitality. I'll do my best as your guest to carry my own weight for as long as I'm under your roof, I concluded. The applause of the sisterhood caught me by surprise. While not over-the-top wild, it was polite and lasted about 10-15 seconds. Chapter 7. As the applause died down, I returned to my seat and sat next to Sheila and tried to relax. I felt like I'd just run a marathon. Darlene gave me a warm hug and a glass of chilled ice water and sat next to me. I don't know which I appreciated more, her company, the hug, or the beverage. I guzzled it down in one long gulp. Public speaking is lonely and thirsty work. The sisters stopped by in ones and twos to exchange small talk with Sheila before retiring for the evening. That was the cover story, at least. I noticed after the third such visit that most of the women seemed to be spending more time sneaking glances at my crotch than they did in conversation with the leader. Great. I was now either the object of sexual curiosity or, at the very least, a diversion from the colony's daily routine. It had been some time since most of the women in the cabin had been with a man, with or without clothes. I sympathized with the animals in the zoo. Maybe I should charge admission. Sheila stood and stretched, after too long sitting on an uncomfortable wooden bench without padding. I'll show both of you to your quarters, if you two are willing to call it a night. After several minutes, the last of the group drifted away to their rooms. The colony's sleeping quarters were on the second-level balcony that ringed the rectangular-shaped great room. I did a quick count. There were 24 doorways in total, 7 on each side of the long axis and 5 on the short sides of the rectangle. Located in the western balcony above the cabin's great room, the rooms reserved for Darlene and I appeared to be identical in size and layout to Sheila's quarters. The sleeping space was stunning in its simplicity. The walls had the same pine paneling we'd seen earlier, with the wide planks of gambrel oak for flooring and exposed wood beams supporting a white plaster ceiling. A colorful handmade antiqued quilt adorned a queen-size bed on the wall opposite a large picture window. I paused for a moment and looked out over the moonlight bathing the sleeping valley. In the distance, the shadows of mountains rose like sentinels into the sky ablaze with stars. The belongings we had brought with us on our journey were neatly filed into a large walk-in closet. I was pleased to see that my tobacco stash had also been unpacked. At the far end of the closet was a small windowless half-bath with an out-of-order sign affixed to the door. Sheila advised me the communal shower was located 2 doors to the left when I asked where I could bathe. I had to admire the cabin's design efficiency. The half-bath used a minimal amount of plumbing and were handy for midnight relief, while the community showers were for general hygiene. Sheila wished us a good night and left us alone. As I prepared for my shower, Darlene wrapped her arms around me and gave me a hug and a smooch that was almost violent in intensity. "I'm so damn horny, Denny. I want you to make love to me right now," she said, took my hands and pulled me next to her on the bed. "Your wish is my command," I replied, and slowly began to kiss Darlene's face. I tenderly stroked her eyelids and cheeks and lightly traced the point with my tongue across her welcoming lips, and followed with kisses under her chin as I moved down and nibbled the nape of her neck. I traversed the edge of her collarbone to her shoulders and rounded the crest before reversing direction and gently kissing down the other side of her neck. Darlene's steady breathing changed into little pants punctuated by low moans as I circled the face with affection. I tenderly stroked her eyelids and cheeks and lightly traced the point of my tongue across her welcoming lips. Followed with kisses under her chin, I moved down and nibbled along the nape of her neck. I traversed the edge of her collarbone to her shoulder's rounded crest before reversing direction and gently kissing the side of her neck. Darlene's steady breathing changed into little pants punctuated by low moans as my hands moved to the inside of my lover's thighs. She parted her legs and allowed me entrance to the space and softly caressed her sensitive skin. She held her breath as my advancing fingertips danced along the edge of her pleasure. She gasped and shuddered as I ventured ever deeper. Darlene's whimper was whisper quiet, and her body glistened with desire as her body took on a deep reddish blush. Her soft moans became slightly louder and steadily aroused as anticipation waited for my touch. I visited and stimulated each erogenous zone in return. I felt the tension building within as she trembled and her muscles tightened in response to ever-building waves of desire. As I slid forward in search of her special place, Darlene lifted her hips in welcome and twisted her body to meet my lips. The point of my tongue gathered her dew as I celebrated and relished every luscious drop. With the tip of my tongue acting like a magnifying glass in a beam of sunlight, I narrowed the focus of her thrill as I guided each particle of delight toward the center of her joy. Women have twice as many nerve endings there as men do. I wanted to stimulate every strand and to be on fire with desire. "Oh, mercy, yes! Don't stop!" she shouted as her body started to shake and quiver. Darlene's climax exploded in a series of spasms as her legs went stiff, then kicked and thrashed about. She moaned, "Oh, yes, that's it, oh, yes." I relaxed the pressure just a tiny bit and redoubled my efforts as I stimulated all the points at the same time. As each wave passed, another approached. I knew when I was finally finished, when she moved me away. I wiped my face with my hand and scooted up and rested alongside my lover's body. I held her close to me, and we cuddled together and basked in the warm afterglow of euphoria. Savoring Darlene's lips, I innocently inquired, "Did I make you happy?" It was a stupid question, but I loved hearing the answer. It was my report card. "You did absolutely fantastic, Dennis, and you know it. My sweetheart, I have come so many times that I lost count," she said as she hugged me tightly as she was able. "That was only the first installment," I replied. "Are you ready for part two?" I kissed her skin in line under her navel and whispered, "Turn over." She eagerly obeyed, and I straddled her and began to massage her bare backside and the inside of her loins. The heavenly and musky scent of lust rose from Darlene like steam, and I savored the sweet, tart taste of her excitement. I proceeded to lick and explore the pathways of desire. Each pass was a little faster than the previous one as I teased and pushed her toward the brink. Darlene suddenly arched her back and screamed, "Oh, Lord, Dennis, stop! Oh!" Darlene's entire body tensed into a screaming, nearly ear-splitting shriek of passion as she reached the top of her mountain peak and kept climbing. Her contractions of bliss squeezed like a pulsating vice as one surge of ecstasy after another before she lay still. "God almighty! Girl, do you think you can make any more fucking noise?" I scolded. "I doubt it, but I can try," she chuckled and tried to catch her breath. "I've been telling the sisters what a fantastic lover you were when I was meeting with Sheila, but I don't think they believed me, so I decided to let them hear for themselves. Besides, honey, you need all the publicity you can get," Darlene explained. "Why would I need any advertising? Well, tonight I think they all heard how hard you can make a girl come. You now have a reputation to uphold, Mr. Talented Tongue. A few of my friends might want you to give them personal tutoring, if you know what I mean." "And you'd be okay with that?" I asked, and I gave her a skeptical eye. "Of course I would be okay, just as long as you make sure that your students use me as the final exam." Darlene laughed with a wink. Okay, I'll think about it," I said as I lowered my mouth and began again. It had been a long day, but the night was still young. This concludes this podcast of Liberty Mountain, No Man's Land, presented to you by Liberty Mountain Radio, the voice of the coming apocalypse. We invite you now to take a moment, like our channel, subscribe, leave a comment. Would like to hear what you think. And tune in next week for the next episode in the continuing saga of Liberty Mountain, No Man's Land. This is Dennis Randall, your narrator, signing off for the evening. Stay safe, stay sane, and remember to be thoughtful and kind to all you meet. Take care.